Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Ursula K. Leguin's short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, has been anthologized not only in many science fiction collections, but also within textbooks and collections that have to do with ethics. And the reason is because she's formulating for us in a sort of narrative way a sort of paradox and thought experiment with several reflections, quite important ones, about the nature of human happiness, and a query for us that she doesn't actually ask in the story, but just leaves for us to ask and answer on our own, namely, if we were residents of this city of Omelas, would we stay or would we go? Would we be among those who walk away, or would we be those who find ourselves able to accept what she describes as a sort of bargain or rule or pact, a requirement? And the story is divided up into three main parts, each of which corresponds to something that she wants us to think about, something that she proposes to us, and she uses her great powers of narration and storytelling to do so. So the first part has to do with the happiness of the city of Omelas. And I'm going to skip through some of the introductory material because we're mostly interested in the ethical content here, the nature of human happiness. She says that this is a city in which the citizens or residents are actually quite happy. She says, joyous. How is one to tell about joy? How to describe the citizens of Omelas? She says, they're not simple people, although they were happy. And she thinks that considering these matters is important for us in our late modern times because we've actually got some mixed up ideas about happiness. She says that we tend to make certain assumptions. So one of the first things that she tells us has to do with the, you might say, political organization of this city. She says, there was no king. They did not use swords or keep slaves. I do not know the rules and laws of their society, but I suspect they were singularly few. So the norms governing them are relatively manageable, you could say. As they did, she says, without monarchy and slavery, so they also got on without the stock exchange, the advertisement, the secret police, and the bomb. So it sounds like these are people who are living a simpler life. And this would actually make good sense given the fact that, Ursula K. Leguin has noted at many different points that the political ideology or theory that she comes closest to is that of anarchism. And in this case, it's not anarchism, though. There actually is a structure to this society. She tells us that, I'm going to jump ahead to technology, they might not have cars or helicopters in and above the streets, and she says this follows from the fact that the people of Omelas are a happy people. But she tells us, and here's one of the early lessons about the nature of happiness, happiness, these are her words, is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary, what is neither necessary nor destructive, and what is destructive. And she says, in this middle category, that of what is neither necessary nor destructive, that of comfort, luxury, exuberance, they could perfectly well have things like central heating, subway trains, washing machines, and all sorts of marvelous devices not yet invented here like floating light sources or fuelless power or a cure for the common cold. And then she says, or they could have none of that. It doesn't matter. The level of technology is not what's making them happy. This is not a, you could say, technological or technocratic utopia. Instead, it has to do with a different sort of condition. So, backing up a little bit, she talks about these people being no less complex than us. And here's another lesson that she has about the nature of happiness. She says that we have a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. We think that people are happy when their simple needs are met, and we say things like ignorance is bliss, and we suggest that if you just find your own little, as Voltaire said, your own little garden, then you'll be okay. And she says, no, that is not the kind of people that we're talking about in this city. She says that the problem is that we think that only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting, and she calls this the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. And then she says we're making a choice here. To praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hold of everything else. We can no longer describe a happy man nor make any celebration of joy. So how can I tell you about the people of Omelas? She says, they were mature, intelligent, passionate adults whose lives were not wretched. And she's willing to say, yes, this is kind of a miracle. If you think about how screwed up the world is at the time that she's writing it and the time she's lived through and the time that we're living in right now, and how fleeting what we think to be happiness often turns out to be, perhaps she's right about that. So she says, let's imagine this city. So we've already put aside the issue of technology. What would they have? And she says, here we go. It might strike you as kind of goody-goody. Smiles, bells, parades, horses, blah. And she says, if so, add an orgy. If an orgy would help, don't hesitate. But let's not have any temples where orgies are taking place with priests and priestesses devoted to that. As a matter of fact, let's have religion, but no clergy. If that's one thing that you need in order to imagine a beautiful, wonderful place where people are happy, some sort of post-sexual revolution, enclave, go ahead and imagine that, she says. Then she says, one thing that I know there is none of in Omelas is guilt. That's the one key thing that's missing. Then she goes on and she says, what about drugs or intoxicants? And so she imagines an intoxicant that she calls druse. It will perfume the ways of the city. It brings a great lightness and brilliance to the mind and limbs. And then after some hours, a dreamy languor and wonderful visions at last of the very arcana and inmost secrets of the universe, as well as exciting the pleasure of sex beyond belief. And it's not habit forming. So imagine the best drug without any of the bad consequences or side effects that we attribute to drugs. And let these people have that as well, that sort of enjoyment. She says, for those who don't really want that, then there's beer. And beer is quite good as well. What else is there? She says, that's all good stuff. That's to help you imagine it. Here's what I want to put on the table myself that they would really have. And if you've ever experienced or at least seen from a distance something like this or imagined it, this is the really key thing about why this city is so wonderful. There is what she calls a celebration of courage. She says the sense of victory, the celebration of courage, but as we did without clergy, let us do without soldiers. A boundless and generous contentment, a magnanimous triumph felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls of all men everywhere and the splendor of the world's summer. This is what swells the hearts of the people of Omelas. The victory they celebrate is that of life. We might think here at this point of the dictum in ancient philosophy that nothing human is foreign to me. Nothing is alien to me. What's best in humanity is things that we can celebrate, whether it came from our nation, our city, or from somewhere else. Now she says, okay, this does seem rather utopian. You may have a hard time imagining this. Let's add the second element. And here we come to the part that induces a sort of sadness as we read it. At a certain age, she says, every citizen of Omelas becomes aware of a terrible reality. What is this reality? So I'll read it to you. She's describing it. In the basement, under one of the beautiful public buildings of Omelas, or perhaps in the cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no window. There is a couple of mops with stiff, clotted, foul-smelling hands stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide. It's actually a mere broom closet. In the room, here's the key element, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but is actually nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes and its genitals. It sits hunched in the corner farthest from the bucket and the 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops. It finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there. And the door is locked. Nobody will come. The door is always locked, and nobody ever comes. Except that sometimes, because the child has no understanding of time or interval, sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens, and a person or several people are there. One may come in and kick the child to make it stand up. The others never come close, but peer in at it with frightened, disgusted eyes. The food bowl and water jug are hastily filled. The door is locked. The eyes disappear. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. I will be good, it says. Please let me out. I will be good. They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whining, and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin there are no calves to its legs. Its belly protrudes. It lives on a half bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores as it sits in its own excrement continually. So we have this picture of a terribly abused child in the household or in a public building of Omelas somewhere. And now here's where the decision comes in. She tells us that all of the people of Omelas know that it's there. Some have come to see it, others merely know that it's there. She tells us also some of them understand why, some do not. But they all understand that there's a correlation between the happiness and beauty of the city, and then a whole bunch of other things that we'll talk about in a moment, and this child's, as she calls it, abominable misery. Now, it's not just the totality of the city and its happiness that we're talking about. All of the individual relations of happiness as well are dependent on this. She says, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest and kindly weathers of their skies. All of these depend on this child's misery and, you could say, continued abuse. So, as she says, this is a coming-of-age ceremony in a way. Between 8 and 12 years old, this fact about their existence is explained to children whenever they seem capable of understanding, and most of those who go to look at the child are, in fact, themselves children. Now, they understand this on a cognitive level. They also understand this on an affective feeling level. She tells us that they feel disgust, which they thought they were superior to. They're shocked and sickened at the sight. So we have that entire modality of aversion over here. Then there's also anger, outrage, impotence. They feel all of those at the same time. They also feel pity or compassion. She says they would like to do something for the child, but they cannot. Why? She says that if this child were comforted and cleaned and taken out, that would indeed be a very good thing. You would be creating new good in the world. But the beauty, the prosperity, the happiness of Omelas and its people would be shattered at that instant. And that, she says, those are the terms. To exchange all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelas for that single small improvement, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the chance of the happiness of one, that would indeed be to let guilt within the walls. And she says these terms are strict and absolute. You may not even speak a word to the child. So what happens? She says young people often go home in tears. They are affected by it on a feeling level. She talks about this as being a paradox. But then, eventually, nearly everybody comes to terms with it. They look at the great good of the city that they're enjoying. And they say, well, the misery of one as opposed to the happiness of thousands. They, in effect, carry out a sort of utilitarian calculation. And they say, this is indeed bad, but I can live with it, given the great good that is being generated. They also realize that even if you took the child out and did clean it and comfort it and tried to teach it and help it in its way on its development, whatever happiness that child would be able to enjoy, and it may not be able to enjoy any, would be of a very low quality. So, for most people, according to Leguin in this city, they're able to come to terms with it. They know it's always there, but they still remain happy as a result. Here's where we come to the third thing, and the reason for the title of this work. She says, I'll just read you the passage. At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who go to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas, through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow-lit windows and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas, they walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go to is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. We don't need to know where they're going. We know that they are rejecting this bargain, this pact, these terms that predicate the happiness of many on the suffering of one. They are rejecting it. So there's something negative about it, but in the way that Leguin is describing it, there's also something positive. They know where they're going. They know something other than this choice, and they are choosing instead another way. So the question then, that, of course, that this frames for us is not just, is this okay, or could something like this exist, but what would you do? Would you be one of the ones who would walk away from Omelas? I think many of us would like to think of ourselves that way, but if you really sat there and you read the descriptions provided and you think about this and you understand that generations after generations after generations have made this bargain and have been okay with it, indeed lived a happy life, well, it might not be so easy in real practice for you to do this. So Leguin here has framed a very interesting thought experiment in great narrative form that she invites all of us to consider.